Iran's nuclear program is once again heating up tensions in the Middle East. 5 rounds of talks between Tehran and Washington have failed to calm the nerves. Ahead of round 6, there are reports that Israel isn't going to hold fire any longer. Are we closer than ever to a full-scale regional war? Stay with us for the debate on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. The US is moving its non-essential staff out of military bases and embassies in Iraq, Bahrain and Kuwait, a sign it knows there's trouble brewing.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they are being, we've given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens.
Is there anything that can be done to dial the temperature down in the region?
They can't have a nuclear weapon. Very simple.
The US has been urging restraint from Israel during months of nuclear negotiations with Iran, but it seems Tel Aviv has run out of patience. There are reports it's ready to defy its #1 ally and launch a military operation against Iran. If it does, it's feared all bets are off. The tinderbox could explode. US-Iran nuclear talks have stalled over Tehran's enrichment program. It insists it's for civilian energy purposes and not weapons production. But for the first time in 20 years, the International Atomic Energy Agency has found Iran is not complying with its nuclear obligations. On this episode of Counterpoints, we'll debate if the region is closer than ever before to a broader war. Is Israel trying to drag the US into another conflict? And why shouldn't Iran be able to have nuclear weapons? To discuss rising tensions between Iran and Israel, the prospect of an all-out war and the upcoming nuclear talks, I'm joined by Anna Kasparian, journalist and host of The Young Turks, an independent American news outlet. Jasmine Al-Jamal is also joining us, a former Middle East advisor at the Pentagon, and Eylon Levy rounding out our panel, a former Israeli government spokesman. Thank you all for joining us here on Counterpoints. Tensions are on the rise again across the Middle East, and one small miscalculation risks plunging the whole region into chaos. There are various reports suggesting Israel is ready to strike Iran, and Iran has fired back and said it would respond forcefully if that was to happen. US President Donald Trump has also said something big could happen soon, and he's weighing his options of support, not to lead any Israeli strikes, but to perhaps assist in things including refueling. So, Eylon, let's start with you. Why do you think Israel is preparing to strike Iran at this point in time, when talks are about to take place? Why now?
Well, nobody wants war with Iran because war is bad, but nobody can afford a nuclear Iran because a nuclear Iran is worse. Israel does not want a war with Iran. Right now, Israel is calling for urgent international action to stop the illegal Iranian nuclear weapons program. But Israel is, of course, preparing for the option that diplomacy will fail, because the United States is demanding Iran cannot enrich uranium at all, block its path to a nuclear bomb. The Iranians are insisting on continuing to enrich uranium. They've already made enough for 10 nuclear bombs. So Israel is preparing for the possibility that talks may collapse and military option may be the last resort. And Israel has twice in history saved the world from authoritarian regimes on the cusp of nuclear weapons. 1981, it took out Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor. 2007, it took out Bashar al-Assad's nuclear reactor. And I think the whole world is grateful now that Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad do not have nuclear weapons.
Anna, let me ask you, I could see you smiling there as Eylon was talking. Do you think that the prospect of a conflict with Iran is less concerning than a nuclear Iran?
Well, first, I would like to ask whether you have any interest at all in fact-checking what your guest just said with a bald-faced lie about how Iran currently has enough enriched uranium to build 10 nuclear bombs. That is a lie.
Enough 60%
Literally no
uranium.
evidence of that.
A short technical hop from 90%.
Because I wanted to interrupt you and I didn't. I wanted to interrupt you and I didn't, even though you were lying. So
well, you just accused me of being a liar, so I'll set the record
your
straight.
Dishonest claims, which are only meant to drag the United States
you don't need to shout. Everyone can hear you.
In a Middle Eastern country on your behalf. Israel needs to fight its own wars. But Israel knows that it cannot fight against Iran. They want to do this strike. They want to do military operations in Iran in the middle of peace negotiations, diplomatic talks between the United States and Iran. Why do you think they want to do that? Iran had stopped enriching uranium. They stopped their nuclear program as a result of the Iran nuclear deal that was signed in 2015. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, was not happy with that deal because he wanted war with Iran. He wants regime change, and he wants the United States military to fight that war on behalf of Israel. It is unacceptable, and we're not falling for it again. You can go all the way back to 2012, and you can hear speeches featuring Netanyahu claiming that Iran was days away from developing a nuclear weapon. It was always a lie. It was a lie then. It's a lie now. And it's absolutely disgusting that more lives are on the line thanks to the lies that are being spewed by propagandists like Eylon on outlets like this. You're a liar. We're not going to go to war on your behalf. Sorry. Move on.
All right, I'm going to bring in Jasmine in just a moment, but I'm going to let Eylon respond to that before we bring Jasmine in.
Because your guest just accused me of being a liar, so I think I have a right to respond.
You are a liar.
Well, indeed. And just a moment, Anna. So that's Eylon why I'm letting you respond.
Breakout time. Iran is now 1 week breakout time from getting nuclear weapons. This isn't me saying, it's not Netanyahu. It's the IAEA that says Iran already has enough 60% highly enriched uranium for 10 nuclear weapons. It's a short technical hop for 90%. There is no civilian purpose at all for having 60% highly enriched uranium. The only possible reason to have that enriched uranium is to build a nuclear weapon, and a nuclear weapon would be a threat not just for Israel, but for the whole Middle East, and yes, for the United States as well.
Okay, I'm going to bring in
the fact that Mossad has been traversing Europe and meeting with IAEA partners has nothing to do with their proclamation that Iran is such a big nuclear threat. But you want to know what I find to be a nuclear threat? Actually,
not really.
The country that's currently committing genocide in the Middle East, and that's Israel. You want to talk about their nuclear weapons?
Okay, pause that for a moment. We're going to come to that in a moment, Anna, but I want to bring in Jasmine here. What's your take on this? Do you think Iran does pose a serious threat? I mean, you've had a close working relationship with the Pentagon. Do you think that we are on the cusp now and that perhaps a war between these two powers is inevitable?
Well, look, no war is inevitable. Let me just start with that. I worked in the Obama administration, and I was in the Obama administration at the Pentagon when Obama negotiated the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And certainly the deal has had its critics, and it did fall short in some areas. It didn't address Iran's malign influence in the region. It didn't address Iran's support for organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas and so on. But it did actually make some progress in getting these, all European countries getting a consensus, getting a diplomatic solution to what everyone agreed was a risk and a problem. And so what I want to just bring here, I want us to just look at the strategic picture in the region, because I think what everyone agrees on this panel is that no one wants war. What we're disagreeing on, I imagine, is whether striking Iran is going to prevent a war or is going to bring us even closer to an all-out regional war. Because Melinda, you said at the beginning of the program that we're one miscalculation away, and we have been for almost 2 years now, and in the past many times, one miscalculation away from war. Now, if you look at the broader strategic picture in the region, as Anna just mentioned, there is what by far a wall-to-wall consensus of genocide experts who are saying that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide.
That is not true.
Eylon,
we'll come to that in a moment, Eylon.
I'm not even going to go into my opinion here, but let me just finish because I did let you guys both talk for quite a bit without interrupting. So the regional picture is that Israel is mired in Gaza in what international human rights experts are agreeing is a genocide now. It has huge troubles at home. You've had Israelis protesting for almost 2 years now. And before that, let's remember, against Prime Minister Netanyahu's overreach and his attempts to meddle with the judiciary. So Israel is already isolated, it's already under pressure, and it can ill afford to be dragged into another war. But more important than that, for the first time in as long as I can remember, or as long as I've even been alive, Israel is surrounded by countries, states, that want to work with it to work towards a better future for the Middle East. For the first time, you have a government in Lebanon that is against Hezbollah and that is trying to do its part, according to the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, to make sure that Hezbollah's weapons in the south are brought in under the control of the state. You have a government in Syria that also, for the first time in decades, is saying loud and clear again and again, we don't want war with Israel. We want a peaceful region. We want to have talks with the Israelis. And indeed, some of those talks are ongoing. You have Egypt and Jordan and UAE and Bahrain who are actually in peace treaties with Israel. And want to help move it forward to a place of peace and security. Now, the only person in this picture that I'm painting that continues to insist on using war and violent force and unilateral cross-border attacks in sovereign countries is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And he is placing the entire region at risk because of his unwillingness to engage in diplomatic talks with people who are willing across the board to do so. So I just wanted to paint that broad strategic picture of what the region looks like right now and why choosing to reject diplomacy at this point when so many opportunities are available for it is putting not just Israelis and people in the region at danger, but as Anna said, US lives as well. And that's not acceptable.
Okay, Eylon, I want you to respond particularly to the comments that Jasmine's made about the fact that is this a deflection tactic from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and your reaction to the fact that this is a time where perhaps Israel is surrounded by neighbours, some neighbours, who do want to work with it. Why not exploit that positive aspect?
That positive dynamic of neighbours who want to work with Israel is thanks to Israel decapitating Hezbollah in Lebanon, paving the way for the fall of the Assad regime, for the first time allowing Lebanese and Syrian people to take back control of their country. And we desperately hope that they choose to make peace with Israel, because wars should end with peace, not a piece of paper. Israel's problem.
But Eylon, I'm sorry, but you keep attacking them as they're trying to help you do that. You attack
Israel
Lebanon,
is still surrounded.
You attack Syria,
Israel
so
is
you're
still
not even
surrounded
giving them the
by
chance.
countries and militias that do not accept that Israel has a right to exist at all. The positive voices that we have been hearing from Lebanon and Syria, very cautious, none of them have said outright they're willing to recognize the state of Israel, are positive. But you know what would undermine any movement towards regional peace in the Middle East? A nuclear Iran. Because if Tehran is able to build nuclear weapons, it will be able to bully the region, to rebuild Hezbollah, to reestablish an influence in Syria, to embolden the Houthi pirates in Yemen who have been firing ballistic missiles at Israel every single day. And smaller countries like Bahrain, like the UAE, instead of being able to move towards greater peace and integration, are going to be looking over their shoulder at the nuclear bully in Tehran. And that is why a nuclear Iran is a threat to Middle East peace. And if we want to see a future of regional integration, like I do, of peace with Lebanon and Syria, they have to be freed once and for all from the clutches of the Iranian regime. And if Iran gets nuclear weapons, it will keep them under its claws.
Anna, let me ask you then, off the back of what Eylon has said, I mean, yes, there are some countries that are now more perhaps amenable in some sense to Israel, but Is that not because Israel has shown force? Tehran has promised in the past to wipe Israel off the map. So isn't it understandable that Israel wants to take those security concerns seriously?
Israel wants regime change in Iran, and they want to maybe consider expanding, in my opinion, outside of just annexing or taking over Gaza and the West Bank, which they've just announced that they're going to build 22 new illegal settlements in. They've annexed a portion of Syria, as we know. They've attempted to annex a portion of Lebanon. There's one aggressor in that region, and that aggressor is the country of Israel. I mean, there's endless evidence of it. And quite frankly, it makes me sick to my stomach to consistently hear the same tired lies that we've heard over and over again from the mouths of people like Levy, who has absolutely no interest in peace in that region. They want to take over more land in that region. And I think it's pretty clear. It's abundantly clear.
Eylon, you were nodding your head when Anna started those comments. Does Israel want regime change in Tehran? Are they unwilling to work with the current leaders and they want to change from the top?
Israel wants peace with Iran. Israelis look back fondly at a time when there were flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. But Iran is now controlled by a radical Islamist regime that leads crowds in chants of death to America and death to Israel. And the lesson we've learned from history is that when people say they're coming to kill us, we believe them. And when they're trying to get the weapons to commit an actual genocide, to wipe us off the map, you have to stop them. So Israel wants to see a future in which the brave Iranian people who are standing up for democracy, standing up for human rights against the brutal oppressive regime, those people are able to govern their country. And the regime that is chanting death to America and death to Israel cannot bully the region, cannot fill it with proxy forces armed to the teeth with ballistic missiles anymore. So, you know, if the Iranian regime wants to change its stripes tomorrow and embrace peace with Israel, we're all for it. But since that's not going to happen, of course Israel would rather see a peaceful and democratic Iran than the theocratic regime that's currently in power, choosing to undermine and subvert Middle Eastern countries, filling them with proxy armies like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis.
Jasmine, what do you think of those comments?
Look, I mean, I think that Eylon is predicating his entire argument on an assumption that is unproven, which is the fact that A, Iran wants a nuclear weapon, B, wants to use it to wipe Israel off the map. I mean, I think that those words came from Ahmadinejad, who I don't know if anyone else here has seen him. I certainly haven't seen a peep out of him in a really long time. He's not in government. The last time I checked, and he's not in charge of anything. So you're predicating your argument, in my opinion, on an assumption that is baseless. We don't have any reason to believe that what you're describing
death to Israel. It's not a metaphor. They mean it.
The fact is, Eylon, I just want to keep coming back to the fact and the point that none of us want a nuclear war in the Middle East. The question is, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? Now, the issue is that the Trump administration came into office in January. We're now barely in June. So you're expecting negotiations over an issue that goes to the heart of Iran and the US and Israel, really complicated negotiations. You're not even giving them 6 months. You want to go in and just bomb your way out of this pickle that you think you're in.
I did not say that.
Just let Yasmin finish, Eylon, and then we'll move on.
Israel wants
You're advocating for a military
because you're putting words in my mouth. You're putting words in my mouth. Israel wants diplomacy to succeed. It's preparing for the possibility that it might fail.
You want diplomacy to succeed, but you're not giving it a chance to succeed. And if you were giving it a chance to succeed, you wouldn't be rattling your saber every 5 minutes saying, we're going to strike, we're going to strike. The fact is that a strike, an Israeli strike against Iran, I cannot overstate how reckless and dangerous that would be if Iran decided to retaliate proportionally. You're putting the entire region, human beings' lives at risk. And I know that everybody on this panel cares about human lives. Iran doesn't just have the ability. Iran.
I think you and I do, for sure.
But let me just, because I think this is important when we talk about the scale of the risk, Melinda. Iran doesn't only have the capability and these missiles, these ballistic missiles with more, with 2,000-pound bombs on them. It doesn't just have those capabilities to strike Israel directly. It also has the ability. I was living in DC. I remember when Iranian agents tried to assassinate the ambassador to Saudi Arabia. They have the ability to respond asymmetrically in the U.S., across Europe, across the Middle East. I mean, is this what we want to risk? Instead of giving diplomacy a chance to work. And last thing I'll say is, trust me, if the American government knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Iran was on the verge of getting nuclear weapons, we wouldn't even be on this panel having this conversation right now. The US wouldn't wait for Israel to strike. They would do it. So that should tell you something also about where we actually are versus what people are saying we are.
So that's an interesting point, because it brings us to our second segment about diplomacy, about talks. President Trump likes to portray himself as this ultimate peacemaker, and he says he has no interest in starting or perpetuating wars that have no America first benefits. But the US is unlikely to sit on the sidelines if a war does break out between Israel and Iran, something which Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu is very well aware of, and maybe he's utilising that as part of Israel's strategy. Eylon, is Israel trying to force the US into this conflict?
No, Israel doesn't want to force the US into a conflict, but I think there is a good cop, bad cop routine here. Because the only leverage that the United States has right now to get a nuclear deal when Iran is 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon is the threat of military action. I was surprised to hear Jasmine saying that if Iran were really on the cusp of nuclear weapons, the US would absolutely go and use the military option. It's not clear to me that the US would do that. It's not clear to me that the US would prefer to attack Iran's nuclear facilities than to allow Iran to go nuclear. But for Israel, it is considered existential. It was existential when Saddam Hussein was on the brink of nuclear weapons. It was existential when the Assad regime was on the brink of nuclear weapons. And it would be existential if the regime that is chanting death to America, death to Israel, and has enough 60% enriched uranium for 10 nuclear bombs were able to weaponize that and turn that into nuclear weapons. So look, everyone wants diplomacy to succeed. Israel is saying we want the international community to take firm, urgent action against Iran's non-compliance right now. But if diplomacy fails, and Iran is indeed a whisker away from converting that into a nuclear weapon, getting that 90% uranium, then Israel is going to be with its back against the wall. And no one needs to tell us what the risks are going to be. I had to run to a bomb shelter when the Iranian regime fired ballistic missiles at us last April and last October.
Yes. Poor
all
Levy.
of my neighbors and all my
country
friends had to run to ballistic.
The slaughter of innocent children in Gaza and the West Bank.
I can't even hear you right now because I'm trying to talk.
You're such a victim, Levy. You're
Israel
such a victim.
Is,
yes, I can't stomach these
can
lies.
Wait your turn.
I really can't.
I understand.
Anna, just let Eylon finish, and then we'll bring you in.
I can't.
You can wait your turn.
It literally makes me sick.
You can wait your turn.
It literally makes me sick. The lies.
Believe me, the nausea is absolutely mutual. I'd never heard of you before, but the nausea is absolutely mutual. I had to run to a bomb shelter when Iran was firing ballistic missiles at Israel, and I will have to run to a missile shelter where I won't be able to have internet connection to continue giving interviews if Iran attacks us.
Stop committing
back.
genocide.
But a nuclear Iran would be the worst option, not only for Israel, but also for all the nations
Israel
in the Middle
currently
East that are desperate to break free from the yoke of the Iranian regime.
Okay, Anna, go ahead.
Just full of lies. I mean, I can show you videos dating back to 1996 in which Benjamin Netanyahu is testifying before Congress to say that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They were lobbying for us to invade Iraq all the way back to 1996. So to the international community, to my fellow Americans, please do not fall for the same lies again. My heart breaks for all the innocent lives that will be lost. My heart breaks for the American soldiers who are going to risk their lives on behalf of this country that is obviously lying to us right now. It is going to be a complete and utter disaster. And if you think that beating Iran or doing regime change in Iran is going to be a cakewalk, consider the fact that it has far greater landmass than Iraq does. 90 million people, far more military capability than Iraq ever had. And we couldn't even defeat the Houthis in Yemen. You think we're going to be able to beat Iran? So many people are going to die. It's going to be a disaster. Don't fall for his lies, please. I'm begging you all to read into it and research it yourself. If you take what the Israelis are saying at face value, you're going to walk into complete death and destruction.
Jasmine, what do you make of those two comments?
Listen, I can tell you, I have been in Middle East policy, either in the region, in government, now outside the government for over 20 years. And I can tell you without exaggeration that every single time we have tried to solve a problem or a challenge in the Middle East with brute force and without diplomacy, without addressing the root causes of the issues, it has come back to bite us tenfold. The Iraq invasion that Anna was just talking about birthed ISIS, and it took years for that to do so. And we all know the impact that ISIS had on Europe, on the region, on the US. I mean, we're still fighting it today. And so I have never seen a problem or a challenge that was solved militarily that didn't create more problems that we also chose to solve militarily. It is a stupidity, it is insanity to do the same thing over and over again and to expect a different reaction. We are talking about human lives that are at risk right now because one person, Benjamin Netanyahu, refuses to let diplomacy have a chance. He is at every opportunity trying to meddle in other countries' affairs and trying to stop diplomacy from happening. This is not an attack against a country or a people. I say it every day on my social media, any chance I get. This is about a man who's in charge of a country who is maniacal, who absolutely wants to just shut down any opportunity for peace, any opportunity for diplomacy to survive politically. Benjamin Netanyahu depends on war to survive politically. Think about how cynical that is, to put other people's lives at risk, not only his own countrymen and women, in order to survive politically. It's so sinister.
Hang on.
Agreed.
You just said that if Iran were on the brink of nuclear weapons, you believe that the United States would activate a military option itself. And then you said that actually a military option isn't going to work and you have to try diplomacy. You know, I'm old enough to remember when the Clinton administration tried to solve the North Korean nuclear crisis with diplomacy. They failed, and now North Korea is nuclear. Either a military option is viable as a last resort,
Israel,
or it is
Eylon.
not.
So
you
is
seem
Israel.
to think that a
Israel
military
has
option would
nuclear
be
weapons.
viable.
Why are
if
you
the
allowed
United
to have?
States,
I mean,
you seem to think that the United States would be able to activate a military option at a weapon of last resort if diplomacy fails, and then say that Israel shouldn't activate it if diplomacy fails. We're talking about a last resort if the talks collapse and Iran remains a nuclear threshold state. That is a dangerous future for a region that would prevent any possibility of peace and normalization with the countries that are currently just starting to break free from decades of Iranian oppression.
They're trying to break free from decades of Iranian oppression, Eylon, but they are unable to break free from continued Israeli oppression. So first of all, if you're so concerned about these
Israel would
countries in the Middle
accept peace with Lebanon and Syria.
Just let Yasmin finish there, Eylon.
Sorry, because the Lebanese armed forces time and again have said we are trying our best to abide by the ceasefire, to go in, to get Hezbollah's weapons. The last military strike that Israel did in southern Lebanon, the LAF went through the tripartite mechanism, asked to go see this place that the Israeli military said had Hezbollah weapons depots. The first time they checked it, they couldn't find anything. The second time they said, let us double check it before you strike. The Israelis wouldn't allow them to do so. But that's not what we're arguing about right now. We are saying that what you're saying is that if as a last resort, this military strike should happen by Israel, what do you define as last resort? 4 months of attempted diplomacy? How long did it take for the JCPOA to be negotiated? We are talking about months and months of important work that needs to be done, sensitive work that needs to be done, and it is being done. This is now the 6th round of talks that's going to happen between Iran and the US on Sunday. That is progress. Let it continue.
Sure, but if I could therefore explain the diplomatic timetable, the restrictions that were temporarily placed in the context of the JCPOA are set to expire in the fall. And that means that unless something dramatic happens and a new deal takes its place, the possibility for snapback sanctions is going to expire in just a few months. So if diplomacy fails just before the possibility for snapback sanctions also expires, while Iran remains a nuclear nuclear threshold state with enough highly enriched uranium for 10 nuclear weapons, then that is a last resort, definitely given the limited window of opportunity now before Iran is able to reestablish its stranglehold on the region, and while Lebanon and Syria are so bravely fighting off that Iranian oppression.
Anna, I want to bring you in here.
Can I ask Levy a question?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I am curious. So my question to you, Levy, is this. You know, you feel strongly about, doing military strikes in Iran. Fair enough. Would you feel as strongly, would you be lobbying as aggressively as you're lobbying right now to do strikes in Iran if the United States took a stand and said, we will provide absolutely no taxpayer money to fund the weapons for that war, and we will not commit to any military assistance to Israel as they try to carry out this war? Would you still want to do it?
A nuclear Iran that chants death to Israel
answer the question.
Is an existential threat to my country. I do not want war with Iran. I do not want a strike on Iran's
You do
nuclear
want war
facilities.
with Iran. Don't
I
stop
want
lying
diplomacy
about that.
to succeed.
Would you still pursue that war?
I'm
Tell
sorry,
me.
you asked me
Yes
a
or no?
question and you keep haranguing me.
And you're
so
not
maybe
answering
bite your
it.
tongue and let me
You're not
answer.
answering it.
I do not want a war with Iran. I cannot afford a nuclear Iran because it would be an existential threat to my country and place everyone here under the specter of a hostile regime with weapons of mass destruction in living memory of the last genocide of the Jewish people. So if Israel's back is against the wall, it will take the action that it has to in order to eliminate existential threats. And we expect to do that with the support of our allies who understand that when Israel eliminates these dangerous threats, it is standing up for the free world and protecting their interests in the region as well.
I just want to remind Eylon, though, as we're talking about this idea about diplomacy failing, I just want to remind everyone that it was Donald Trump that pulled out of the JCPOA. Iran negotiated a deal before. Iran never left the deal. So what makes you think that Iran won't sign another deal after intense negotiations to get the best deal that they can? They never left a deal in the first place. So what's this, where is this coming from?
The question is, what is in the deal? Does the deal leave a pathway open for Iran to build nuclear weapons? Can it hold on to its highly enriched uranium? Can it continue to retain the ability to enrich uranium that in future, when it is more powerful and spies a window of opportunity, it can use to build nuclear weapons? We need a deal that eliminates Iran's nuclear program. It's been done before. It was done with Libya, where diplomacy succeeded, and they dismantled Libya's nuclear program. And if diplomacy works and Iran agrees to that, great. I'll be the first one to cheerlead it. But at the moment, the US's red lines do not match Iran's red lines because Iran is demanding that it remain a nuclear threshold state that can enrich its own uranium when it has already enriched so much more at such high levels that have absolutely no civilian justification. The only possible reason to have so much 60% uranium is to build a nuclear bomb.
You've been in government. I've been in government. We both know that that's how negotiations start. You have two parties on opposite ends of a spectrum, and negotiations get them to a position that both of them can swallow, that both of them can accept. That is what negotiations are for, Eylon. Not war, not strikes, negotiations.
And I hope they succeed.
Anna, last word from you before we move on to our next segment.
Nuclear bomb is closed off.
I just think it would be a huge mistake for the United States to get involved in yet another regime change war in the Middle East. Americans are sick of it. We have our own problems in our own country. We provide Israel billions of dollars every single year, no questions asked, for their defense. We provided them with, the Iron Dome. They get endless support from the United States, sometimes to the detriment of the American people. And it would be ridiculous to get dragged into another war that does not need to even begin. And I totally agree. We can pursue diplomatic means. If we're going to have a problem with Iran enriching enough uranium to provide energy to their people, we should maybe reconsider whether or not we're okay with Israel being a nuclear power, which, if you notice, Levy refused to even acknowledge for good reason. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a very, very timely point, Anna, because that brings us exactly onto our final segment. Israel is widely believed to have possessed nuclear weapons since the 1960s, but it has never officially declared its weapons program. It's the only country of the 9 sovereign states in possession of nuclear weapons to maintain such a level of ambiguity, of this opaque veil over their nuclear program. Eylon, let me ask you then, if Israel is happy to fly under the radar, why should Iran have to be held to a higher standard? Why shouldn't it have nuclear weapons if Israel's allowed to have them and not declare them?
Iran is threatening the existence of a sovereign state. It leads crowds in chants of death to Israel. It surrounded Israel with a ring of fire of proxy armies like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis that have rained hundreds, thousands of ballistic missiles on this country in recent years. Iran is an aggressor, revisionist state that is attempting to expand control in the Middle East and place it under its thumb, while Israel is trying to reach peace and normalization accords with other sovereign states. So the Iranian nuclear bomb would be a threat for the whole region. It would be a threat for the whole world because the Houthi pirates who are currently shooting missiles at ships in the Red Sea would come under the protection of a nuclear power that is going to seek to metastasize inside Lebanon, inside Syria, inside Iraq, subvert these countries from within. And if Iran gains nuclear weapons, it would be unstoppable. And an Iranian-dominated Middle East would be a direct threat to Europe and beyond.
Anna, let me ask you that same question. Why shouldn't Iran have nuclear weapons?
Well, I think in the case of Israel, it would be a lot more difficult to, carry out some of the acts and cheerlead for the types of wars that they've been able to drag the United States into in the Middle East. Nuclear weapons can be seen as a deterrent, as has kind of been the case in this war in Ukraine. Part of the reason why the United States and Ukraine has to be incredibly careful is because of the fact that Russia is, in fact, a nuclear power. In that particular case, Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons in the 1990s at our behest ended up really being not a great idea for Ukraine, because that deterrent could have really helped them in this particular case. Now, once Iran has possession of a nuclear weapon, it's a lot more difficult for Israel to manufacture the consent necessary to invade that country. I think that's really at the heart of this. But I would love for Iran to not have nuclear weapons. I would love for Israel. I didn't interrupt you, even though your disgusting lies were spewed endlessly.
This is ridiculous.
No, it's not ridiculous. I'm telling the truth. And here's the thing. There aren't a lot of American journalists who have been willing to tell
in a region of sovereign
states, as honestly as I'm doing, and you guys
Israel
can't stand it. I get it. It's really difficult.
You don't need to
you guys just let Anna finish, Eylon, then we'll come to you.
Well, let me finish. Yeah, I know it hurts your feelings. I know it's difficult for me to explain exactly what the Israeli government's plans are, what they have dragged us into in the past. I just want to note one other thing. Not too long ago, I think it was last month, as international diplomats from Europe actually were in the occupied area of Jenin specifically, the IDF fired bullets at them. And by the way, later took responsibility of the fact that they fired bullets at them. That seems like terroristic activity. Why was that okay? And why have we not heard about the consequences that those IDF soldiers faced, if any at all, after they decided to fire rounds at international diplomats as they were visiting Jenin?
In that particular incident, there was a misunderstanding because the diplomats had agreed and approved the route with the army and then diverted from it in an active battle zone. But I have to push back against this really crazy accusation, as if you're trying to find my little horns on my head here. Israel wants peace and normalization in the region. Israel would like nothing more than peace agreements tomorrow with Lebanon, with Syria, with Iraq, with Yemen. They do not want peace with Israel. Israelis were overjoyed when the Abraham Accords happened, and Morocco and Bahrain and the UAE made peace with Israel. And we were hoping that Saudi Arabia would be next. And then what happened? Hamas invaded on October 7th, brutally massacred 1,200 people, took 251 hostages in an attempt to foil peace in the Middle East. This Iranian-funded, trained proxy militia launched the opening shot of a regional war against Israel in order to prevent the positive dynamic of peace and normalization in the region. We want to see that continue. For that to continue, Iran cannot have nuclear weapons one way or another, preferably diplomacy.
Can we talk about all the funding sources for Hamas? Because if I remember correctly,
if diplomacy
facilitated the funding of Hamas.
The problem with cutting me off is that I can't actually hear you while I'm speaking. So if you let me finish speaking, I will be able to hear your interruption. Israel wants peace and normalization in the region. Iran is trying to put the whole region under its imperial foot. That is the key difference.
Okay, to keep things on track, I'm going to ask a question to Yasmin. If you were Iran and you've seen the way Israel has behaved to you in the past, you see the way that the US has behaved, would you trust that they're going to lift sanctions if you sign up to this nuclear deal? If you were Iran, wouldn't you want to develop nuclear weapons to protect yourself?
I mean, you don't have to try very hard to put yourself in any country's shoes to answer that question. If you just look at what's been happening over the last few months, every time that Israel enters into a ceasefire agreement, it reneges on its responsibilities. In January, when the Trump administration came in and pushed a deal through between Hamas and Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu balked when it came time to negotiating phase 2. And this is not according to my personal opinion. This is from Israeli negotiators who are in Doha, who are privy to these conversations. It is a well-known fact, and Benjamin Netanyahu has stated it clearly. I mean, we can all read the Israeli press. It's translated into English. He doesn't want to abide by any ceasefires. Same thing in Lebanon. There was a ceasefire. Israel was supposed to withdraw from Lebanese territory. It still holds 5 locations in southern Lebanon in violation of that ceasefire. So we don't have to guess, what Israel would do if an agreement was signed. We already see what it's doing. I think the biggest problem here, and I've seen this both inside and outside of government, is that Israel, unfortunately, when Eylon says that Israel wants peace, I believe that Israelis want peace. But when Eylon says that this Israeli government wants peace, they want peace for them, not peace for everybody. They want to make sure that no one attacks them, but that they have the ability to attack people and countries whenever they feel like it. They hold themselves to a different standard, and they hold other countries to different standards than they hold themselves. Israel conducted its nuclear program in secret and then said, well, we're not going to talk about it, but they have a nuclear program. It was conducted in secret because they said we're faced with threats all around us. Well, Iran can say the same thing. It can say we're faced with a threat from Israel. Look at how it's acting all throughout the region. We'd better protect ourselves with a nuclear weapon. But lastly, I want to say, and this is to me something that I think is really important and pervades the way that Israel and also Western countries deal with the Middle East. It's quite dehumanizing and it's quite racist to think that everybody around you is incapable of acting like rational human beings, when in fact you're the one who's acting irrationally, according to every person, every military strategy. Excuse me, I'm just saying, when it comes to Prime Minister Netanyahu, when it comes to this government's strategic plans and their implementation in Gaza, you have Israeli military generals, you have former US secretaries of defense who are saying that this makes absolutely no strategic sense. You have an opportunity, just to come full circle to what I started with, a historic opportunity in the region where most of the countries in the region want to work together towards peace. And you're choosing the same old, tired, ineffective military solutions that are never actually solutions.
Let's have peace.
I think we can all agree on that, Eylon. I think what we're seeing is that the Prime Minister of Israel is not interested in peace. And everyone is talking about Iran, 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 but we're not talking about the fact that Israel has slapped every outstretched hand that has been stretched out in its direction for the last 2 years, ever since what... Look, you can't deny that. If you want to deny that, I want to hear what you have to say.
Netanyahu is expecting... No, I'm sorry, look, I don't speak for the government, okay? But Netanyahu
I didn't say you are. We're talking about what's happening in the region
right now. Netanyahu is expecting the crowning achievement of his premiership and his legacy to be a peace accord with Saudi Arabia. He sees peace with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco as some of the biggest achievements of his time in power.
But instead, his legacy is going to be genocide, Eylon. That's done. That ship has sailed.
Of course, we don't want Iranian proxy armies on our borders to have the ability to fire ballistic missiles, invade our cities, and butcher people at will. Of course, Israel wants peace. And if Lebanon wants peace,
Lebanon and Syria.
Jasmine, we'll just let Eylon respond, and then we'll come back
immediately. If Syria wants peace, it should have peace negotiations immediately. They will find a willing Israeli partner.
Anna, I mean, we can just see that's not true. I don't know what to say when we can actually see with our own eyes.
Why do you think Israel would want to be surrounded by countries that don't recognize it and don't accept its existence and are a state of war with it? We've been in a state of war with our neighbors since 1948.
That's exactly my question. Why would it want to continue doing this?
Israel. Of course, we want them to get over their historical hump and move forward to a future of peace and reconciliation. We're waiting for them to get stuck out of the past.
Anna, what's your take on it?
Yes. I'm just, listen, this is very simple. The country that is currently carrying out a genocide and the illegal annexation of the West Bank, building more illegal settlements. You need to stop interrupting me when I'm saying something.
Eylon, let Anna respond, and then we'll come to you for the final word before we wrap up.
I don't believe Israel wants peace. Israel's behavior over the last year and a half gives me every indication that they're not interested in peace. They are carrying out the slaughter of innocent people, both in Gaza and the West Bank. They're doing it with absolutely no brakes in that car. And it's unacceptable that U.S. taxpayers are bankrolling that genocide. It gives me a great deal of shame to know that. But unfortunately, our politicians here are bought. I do wonder what exactly our politicians would actually think if they weren't bought by lobbying groups like AIPAC, for instance. But alas, we have corruption baked into our political system. And as a result, the American people and civilians in the Middle East have to suffer on behalf of the Israeli government.
Eylon, final response from you, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah. I mean, Anna, with this deranged conspiratorial thinking, is trying to manufacture consent for political violence against Jews and Israelis around the world by framing Israel as genocidal. We
one-trick ponies, always the same
October
argument.
7th with a brutal massacre in which people were mowed down at a music festival and children were burned alive in their homes. And in response, Israel is fighting a war in the most difficult urban battlefield possible, where Hamas has dug tunnels under schools and homes and even hospitals. Mohammed Sinwar was hiding under the emergency department of the European hospital in Gaza. So is that destruction? Yes, of course. It's because the government of Gaza placed its military bases under civilian areas. It should free the hostages hostages.
We
and surrender.
can't get too bogged down
You
in
guys don't care
Israel,
about
Gaza,
hostages.
because
Stop
that's a
pretending.
whole other show. Eylon, if you could just focus your final comments on the Israel-Iran situation, and then we'll leave it there.
I hope that diplomacy succeeds in preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And then I hope that Iranians are able to build a democracy in their country and that we can have peace between Israel and Iran.
Indeed, I wish we had more time to continue this debate because it's been really illuminating and we have appreciated everyone's input, but unfortunately we have to leave it there. Thank you very much to Ana Kasparian, journalist and host of The Young Turks, Jasmine Al-Jamal, a former Middle East advisor at the Pentagon, and Eylon Levy, a former Israeli government spokesman. Your contribution here at Counterpoints is very valued. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And as always, thanks to you at home for watching Counterpoints here on Al Arabiya English. To watch all the latest debates and interviews and avoid missing out, subscribe to Al Arabiya English on YouTube. And you can follow us also on X and TikTok. Thanks for joining us.